DAF Day, and DAFs are so much the trend in which giving is headed. These days are very much aligned with that trend. Online giving very much aligns with that trend. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, DAF Day has larger overall donation revenue than Giving Tuesday does. It feels like you all are right in line with where everything is headed in the sector in fundraising and donations overall. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Proimpact Pod. How should modern EDs think about blank? ... Question mark. Different topic every week. This week, DAFs, which is something that EDs are trying to figure out how to implement these into their long-term vision and strategy, and the best strategies for doing that, but also misconceptions that people might have in and out of the nonprofit sector, that board members might have, that your donors might have about DAFs. And so we're going to get to the bottom of all of that. We are lucky to be joined by no one to be able to inform us better, I don't think, than Mitch Stein, head of strategy at Chariot, the donor-advised fund payments company. He leads all of their big sector-wide initiatives, such as DAF Day, which is coming up and we're going to be talking about, and the DAF fundraising report. He's also an avid fundraiser himself, has served on the board of the New York City LGBT Center, and has been a longtime rider in their Cycle for the Cause, the Northeast AIDS Ride. So excited to welcome to our LinkedIn Live, Mitch Stein.
Hey, Greg, thank you so much for having me. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's going well. So before we ask you how modern EDs should think about DAFs, we always like to start with sort of why EDs should think about a particular topic. And so if there's one stat or something, a fact that you can tell us that really opens people's eyes and say, okay, this is why I need to be focusing about on this.
All right, I'm going to be greedy, but I have to do 3 stats if you don't mind. But the biggest one is that there's $250 billion at least already committed to giving in DAFs.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B, and that's as of the end of 2023. And I would bet you everything that it's significantly higher now, midway through 2025. And the important thing is that that money is irrevocable. It can only be used for charitable giving. It can't be used for anything else. So just a tremendous opportunity. And the people that have set those funds aside they set up a specific fund for their giving. They're intentional, they're engaged philanthropy, they want to be activated. That's number one. Number two, when people use a DAF, it's proven that they give significantly more than if they were to use a credit card. So we'll talk about that, but it's just that's the opportunity there. It's pretty binary. It's like 10x if I'm going to give it my DAF versus a credit card on average. So that's like an unlock on an individual basis. And just that this is growing so quickly. We did a large scale research report, and among participating nonprofits, the median annual growth rate in DAF revenue in 2024 was 30% year over year.
Wow. So we're all competing for these 3% growth and trying to figure out how to balance out a 2% decline. You're seeing these enormous growths in the actual revenue from DAFs. So then one of the things I've loved some of your posts on LinkedIn that really focus on how EDs and everyone should not think about DAFs. So I actually wanted to sort of start there. What are some misconceptions that you think exist out there about DAFs, and how do you shatter those?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing labor of love. I don't think they're going to change overnight, but the single biggest one that I really kind of rant against on my LinkedIn the most is the thought that DAFs are a tool for the super wealthy only when making large gifts. And those are 2 distinct points that are really important. One, DAFs are not only for the super wealthy. There's millions of people now that are using this tool. Yes, it is popular amongst folks that have greater capacity to give. But first and foremost, it's a signal about someone that's just deeply engaged with their philanthropy, and that they're taking proactive steps to set aside funds for giving as a part of their budgeting, as a part of their investing plan. It's a part of their life. And I think that's something that really gets missed. And the second piece is that even if it is used by major donors, they want to use that DAF for everything. They don't only want to make their annual $25K, $50K gift. guess what? When they're doing the paddle raise at your gala, or they're supporting their friend doing the 5K walk, they're responding to your DAF Day campaign, your Giving Tuesday effort, whatever. They have this money that's like tax advantage dollars already set aside for its purpose. And they always want to use that. It's like if you have a gift card to a store, you always would rather use the gift card than your own cash, right? Or your own credit card, because that hits your budget that month. And so that's just something that people miss. They don't realize how people want to use their DAFs or who's using them. And I think that's the biggest misconception.
I love that idea and conceptualization of DAFs as this enormous gift card of charitable giving that people have created that opens it up in a whole new way, and sort of relates to a misperception that I've seen you post about the idea that once someone has donated money to a DAF, that nonprofits should almost think of it like institutional giving and try to reach out to the administrators of the DAF, the bank and institute holding it itself. Do you have any thoughts on that? If that's just a total misperception, or if sometimes that makes sense, or any thoughts on that strategy?
Yeah, this is probably where I've seen some of the worst advice shared by people to nonprofits, EDs, and fundraisers. Is this thought that like, oh, the secret to getting more DAF giving is you just got to get Fidelity Charitable to know about your mission, and then they're going to tell all their fund holders to donate to you. And they try to like boil it down to something as simple and totally unattainable as that. So by and large, like especially as a first step, getting involved with DAF fundraising strategy, the first step is not go try to make relationships at 1,000 different DAF providers. Like, you don't have the bandwidth in your organization to do that. Like, yeah, Doctors Without Borders has a full-time person that's like a DAF partnerships manager, but that's just like not super practical or actionable for most organizations, nor is it going to get you the highest return. There's a lot of lower hanging fruit to pursue in growing DAF giving, especially when it comes to the big DAF providers. It's just like such a moonshot to think you're going to develop a relationship there that turns into recommendations to fund holders to donate to you. Because not only do they just have too much going on to pay attention to, every nonprofit wants that, right? And not only don't have the bandwidth to manage all that, they are generally against making specific recommendations because of their position.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And yeah, I mean, if there's like a crisis, there's a hurricane or wildfire, oftentimes they'll be like, here's 10 organizations that we've vetted with some expert that you could donate to. But generally, they're not making specific recommendations. And also, I think most financial advisors are not making specific recommendations to their clients. The one exception to this rule is if you are in a local community where a community foundation manages a DAF program and does some direct grant making in the community, apply for their grants, like whatever their grant cycle is that they have open applications for, because the program officer at the community foundation that's evaluating your grant application is the one that gets pulled into donor discussions with their DAF providers when someone is seeking more hands-on guidance to say, hey, I really care about early childhood education in our local community. What are some interesting organizations you've seen doing good work in that space? And like, oh, well, I just read 5 applications. Like, that's where there's productive use of your time to get in front of DAF providers. But that would be my angle on it. That's more practical.
Yeah. And so in that way, it's almost this extra benefit of something that's, applying already versus trying to take that person out for lunch or whatever. And again, to go back to that sort of like gift card analogy, it's still the donor who you're trying to reach out to with the same, who will be making decisions for the same reason. It's just where the funds come from. So that's super helpful.
Yes. Sorry. It's a really good thing to underline is that DAF giving is individual giving. Full stop. And that's something that gets missed at a lot of organizations where they think about it in like corporate partnerships, foundation relationships. They think about it in only like major or planned giving. This is a pot of money, and it is cash too. Like that's the other thing. People think about it as like non-cash giving. When you get a gift from a DAF, it's cash. Your organization's always receiving cash. One of the benefits, honestly, is that you're not having to handle complex asset contributions. That's like what the DAF specializes in. So they take in all different kinds of assets, and then they're the ones dispersing cash grants to nonprofits. But ultimately, it is a pool of assets, a pool of money for an individual to determine how they want to grant those funds. And so you want to treat it like your other methods of individual giving, and you want it to be a part of all types of individual giving. Like, is your direct mail campaign mentioning the ability to use DAFs? Do you have clear CTAs around this on your website, in your giving forms, at your events? People can, as long as it's DAF eligible, right? They're not purchasing something with their DAF. You want to be reminding people to use it and make it as easy as possible.
Mm-hmm. And so for us, when we were planning out the content for this series, we scheduled this conversation to be right before we talk to Ria Wong next week about major gifts, with the idea of sort of like setting the framework around DAFs and then, segueing into major gifts, which in this conversation, I think is a perfect segue into, so what the best strategy is for EDs. And I think the DAF Day idea is such a brilliant one for sort of giving a super tangible way that organizations can think about that. Tell us a little bit more about DAF Day for folks who might not know.
Yeah, happy to. So DAF Day is a national holiday for DAFs, a national giving day for DAF giving. It is their second year. We started it last year in collaboration with several dozen nonprofit partners and DAF partners, and was a bit of an experiment, to be honest. We kind of announced it 10 weeks beforehand. It takes place in early October, and we were just blown away by the activity level and participation. We had over 1,000 nonprofit organizations that signed up to participate. We just saw an unbelievable amount of activation and engagement. And so we really doubled down and expanded everything happening this year. But to your point, for anyone who's thinking like, okay, I get it, DAFs are important, we want to activate this, but like, where do I plug in or where do I start? This is such a great on-ramp, because you don't need to set anything up for yourself. You don't need to establish anything. You can just plug into a conversation that's already happening in the sector. Your supporters are likely going to be hearing about this from another nonprofit, and that's great, right? The more people they're hearing about DAF Day and DAFs from, the better. If they have one already, they're going to be more. People need to hear about something 7 times, but I'm sure you have talked about this in another conversation, Greg. When you want someone to do something, they need to hear about it 7 times on average before they take action. So if someone's hearing about DAFs and DAF giving from this like large odd group of nonprofits around this same day, way higher likelihood that they take action and make those gifts. There's also a ton of resources that you can leverage for free. There's a whole marketing toolkit that gives you some like social media graphics, some templates for emails, presentations you can do if you want to do a teach-in for donors. Like, it's all there. And so it just is this, no matter the size of your organization or your stage of how established your DAF fundraising strategy is, DAF Day is a great opportunity. And that's what really excites me about it. I was just doing a webinar with the SVP of Advancement at the Leukemia Lymphoma Society a few hours ago. And some people on the call were like, this sounds great, but what about for small organizations? And I'm like, I know it's sometimes be hard to relate between like big and small nonprofits, but it's really the same message. It's the same opportunity. You've got DAF donors in your audience that just haven't used their DAF to support you yet. And this is such a good opportunity to make sure that they know that's possible and give them a deadline to do it.
And one of the things I think that makes it an easier on-ramp for smaller organizations is the amount of resources, and you just mentioned this, that you all do provide. And so I think Chris, our producer, has got one example of that with this sort of like content buckets, and maybe you can speak to this one specifically, or just more broadly, the resources that you all put together for kind of how people can talk about DAFs, how to structure a fundraising campaign that you would most appeal to folks that have DAFs. But I loved all of these content buckets. Anything that you think is most helpful for organizations to be thinking through in the sort of how they strategize, put together an initial strategy for a DAF Day campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is the only wrong way to do DAF Day is to not participate. And so we try to give people just a ton of options for ways that they can activate with what makes sense for them internally, what they have going on, what their calendar is, what their bandwidth is. But in giving so many options, we let people kind of choose their own adventure, and thinking about how they structure the campaign and lead up. I would say the big thing for me is that I do feel strongly about is that there is some phase of education before that solicitation. So that's what we try to provide, and what you were showing there is some of these like ideas for social media posts or content to create that is like, what is a DAF? Like last year, the Public Theater here in New York City made a quiz to help people learn about DAFs, and there was like a raffle for people that answered it that got free tickets to Shakespeare in the Park. So just like get creative, think about ways that you can infuse DAF education with maybe things you already have going on in that September timeframe. And then I would say like the week leading up to DAF Day and obviously on DAF Day to pivot that messaging to be like, not just learning about what DAFs are, but using them. And like, here's the difference you can make with that DAF, and like an update on your cause and your mission and how far that gift is going to go. The other thing that I think is really important for people is to not overthink like segmentation. So I've heard a lot of people like audience segmentation, a lot of people concerned like, oh, I don't want to send DAF 101 or education materials to people that have already given to us with a DAF. You don't need to overthink that, because DAF fund holders are used to others not knowing what a DAF is. So they encounter that in their own life. I, as someone that uses a DAF, encounter this all the time. And they're very excited to tell people about it, because generally they're like super fans. They understand the power of it. It's helped them give way more. They're way more engaged with their philanthropy, and they love it. And so educational content is actually really exciting for someone that already knows what a DAF is, because they feel very seen. And then they're likely to share it even further, which is huge for you. And if someone doesn't know what a DAF is, it's obviously speaking to them, and they can have a chance to learn about it. So I just think that's a really important framework to understand, that you don't need to overthink the segmentation. Look, if you've got the bandwidth on DAF Day to think about a message to existing DAF donors and one to prospective or whatever, like obviously go at it. You can make it more complicated if you want to, but it doesn't need to be overly complicated.
Yeah. The segmentation point makes me think of a question, not to throw you a curveball, but I'm curious, and then I'll give you some of the context, but I'm curious how much data you all have about DAF holders, the demographics of DAF holders being different or not different than other segments of donors. And one of the, part of the context is, one of the things that we're really big on at the Proimpact Project is the idea of fundraising campaigns that are very much about getting your donors to think about making an investment in the type of impact that they want to create, and fundraising that's not just story-based, but sort of, if, for investments of this amount, this is how we're going to use your donation to efficiently create impact in the future, et cetera. And so I wonder if, just on a immeasurable way, DAF donors by nature tend to think more that way. But I wonder if you have any demographics about DAF holders versus other segments of donors.
Yeah, I mean, I generally think about DAF donors in three key buckets. There's millions of them, right? So they don't always fit nicely into these different boxes. And so there's like folks that are using like the organizer, someone that has set up a DAF to help them manage their giving in one place, and maybe they want to set a goal, but it could be relatively small scale. They might not even be getting any tax benefit for it, but they're just like want to be more engaged. They're like getting organized. And then you've got the optimizer, and it's like kind of the middle range of someone that's like, they are thinking strategically which shares of stock to contribute that appreciated this year that I can maximize my tax benefit. They're probably doing like bigger lump sum contributions in certain years and granting that out over a few years. And then at the end, you've got the builders, and those are people that are using a DAF as a private foundation. And as an alternative to a private foundation. I mean, where they're like maybe a huge windfall event, a business sale, an inheritance event. And so they've set up a DAF account to kind of manage like long-term giving. They've got the whole family involved. So we see that. That's kind of like the spectrum of DAF donors and those like demographics. But what's interesting is all three of those demographics, from someone giving you $100 from their DAF to $1 million, honestly have a lot of similarities. They are very proactive and engaged with their giving. They want to do research. They want to understand the cause better. So giving them details, I think, is super powerful. They also generally are doing this as like an investment fund, right? They think about this alongside their normal savings and investments. And so they have that kind of like investing mindset in general to their giving. So your ability to, like you were describing, these like, breaking it down into tangible pieces of outcome that can be achieved with their gift, I think is great. And framing, like using language that speaks to that, right? They're very data driven, very like outcome return oriented, because they have this fund is invested, right? And so I think anything you can do there to speak to these donors in that type of language goes a long way. Yeah. And I would just say, when you talk about demographics, the most fascinating thing we see is how much these folks are digital and at all giving levels. So we just did a very large scale research report called the DAF fundraising report that we published a little over a month ago. And we found that across millions of DAF donations, that 69% of them were below $1,000 among the participating organizations. And I just think that's surprising to people. And we also just put out a case study today with Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, who has done a total transformation of their DAF fundraising strategy. And among their digital DAF giving, they found that a third of them were paying on their phone. They're giving from their DAF on their phone to LLS. And that's just so far from most people's conception of a DAF donor, is like they're mail responsive, they're in their 70s. And actually these are digital donors. They have to go to a portal to log in and make a gift, or they're doing it through DAF Pay, our tool. But we've got to totally rethink these folks as offline donors. These are digital donors.
Yeah, Mitch, this conversation has been eye-opening for sort of like how big the middle of the Venn diagram is between sort of DAFs and DAF donors and what we're trying to do with Proimpact Project. And part of the idea being that those types of, an organization can only create a fundraising campaign about a big ambitious vision when the ED is really working hand in hand with the development team to create a fundraising campaign that's about how to scale across the entire organization. That in a silo, the development team really only has access to stories and whatnot. But when EDs work together with development teams, you can create these pitches about the long-term vision and whatnot that seem like perfect fits for what you described as the sort of the optimizer or the builder, like those two personas, and folks who are more digitally savvy and tend to be make donations online. And so this is all really, really interesting. And I think, is going to tie in together and be exciting lead in for that conversation next week with Ria. And I think that what you all are doing with DAF Day, I'm curious. One of the first things that I thought when I ever heard about DAF Day was that it sounds like Giving Tuesday for DAFs. I'm curious if that's a comparison that you all like or dislike, or what your thoughts are there. And we only have a little bit of time left, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good framing. It's another activating moment where a lot of nonprofits benefit from a shared message that's being sent broadly. So I'm absolutely appreciate that comparison. I think what's interesting and different, in my opinion, is that there's so much more education, right? With Giving Tuesday, you're not really like educating someone about using their credit card to make a donation. You're just like, here's the cause and make an impact. Whereas with DAF Day, there's kind of a nice element of a lot of people aren't familiar with this. And so in addition to a solicitation and making an ask, you're delivering value. You're informing someone about a tool that might be useful to them. And I think that's just always, as a fundraiser, always a nice thing to not just be making an ask, but to always be trying to deliver some value. And so that's where I think there is a comparison there, but some differences that are important. And I think it's a good lead into Giving Tuesday, by the way. This is a very specific type of giving that you're talking about in early October. And by early December, late November, it's time to be talking about a different activation. And now you have a list of donors that have shown you they have a DAF and they like to participate in group giving moments.
Well, DAF Day, and DAFs are so much the trend in which giving is headed. These days are very much aligned with that trend. Online giving very much aligns with that trend. I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, DAF Day has larger overall donation revenue than Giving Tuesday does. It feels like you all are right in line with where everything is headed in the sector, in fundraising and donations overall.
Yeah, I would love that. Definitely the dream. It's a little harder to track than general online giving. That's like our big struggle, is knowing oftentimes the gifts don't arrive till later. But that's another conversation we can have on gift processing and how it relates to EDs. The one thing I do want to flag before you wrap up, Greg, is I think it's super important to your point about how EDs interface with fundraising. You need to set the tone for prioritizing this topic and making sure your team has the resources to feel comfortable on the topic. I start every conference presentation, I do like dozens a year, with the question, who in here knows what a DAF is? And like now, 2 years ago, it was not very many people. Now it's like 90% of the audience raises their hand and says yes. And then I ask, how many people would feel comfortable explaining what a DAF is to a donor? And then like way over half of the hands come down. So I don't take for granted that your team all like gets it. Be like spearhead the education here and like bring up the conversation and make sure people understand it. We have so many resources for this at Chariot. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. But that is key. Like even if you're using good technology for DAF giving, like DAF Pay, that's one piece of the puzzle. Like if your team doesn't know like how to promote it and message it and engage your donors around it, you're not going to get the full potential. And that has to start at the top.
Yeah. And that totally makes sense. And so we appreciate you coming in and doing this and talking to EDs about how they should think about it, and trying to curate content that's for executive directors to not necessarily know how to execute on any of these things, but just understand conceptually how these topics should fit into an overall strategy. And so, Mitch, I totally appreciate you joining us today, and we're excited to see the ramp up to DAF Day this year.
Thank you so much. Great to see you, Greg. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as we mentioned, next week, we're going to be having Ria Wong talking about major gifts, but particularly major gifts for how to think about those strategies with big, bold visions and growth strategies and trying to scale and reaching out to donors in that way. And so it fits perfectly with DAFs and with the upcoming DAF Day campaigns. And so we encourage folks to tune in. I appreciated John, who made a comment about how to tune into these future episodes. Just follow Proimpact Project, and you'll continue to get notifications as we roll them out. We would love suggestions about what other topics you would like to know, how modern EDs should think about them. So let us know in the chat or reach out to us. And absolutely hope to see you all next week. We've got a little video about leading into that episode.
Coming up on episode 106 of the Proimpact Pod, how should modern executive directors think about major gifts? Join host Greg Harrell Edge and special guest Ria Wong live on LinkedIn on Tuesday, August 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern, or catch the replay on YouTube.